welcome. My name is Koomen. I'm a product manager on the Google App Engine team, and I'm here with Brett Slatkin, one of the software engineers on the team as well. I'm going to spend probably the next hour or so just kind of giving you an informal overview of Google App Engine, running through a few of the components that make up App Engine, and Brett's, actually I have an agenda right here. So I'll start talking a bit about the problems involved in building web applications. Now, I just talked about those like half an hour ago, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But then I'm going to talk a little bit about what Google App Engine is, and then Brett's going to give a great demo of building an application live from scratch in a little less than 10 minutes. And then we're going to go through some of the components that make up App Engine, a little more detail. And finally, going to talk about some of our future plans, what it means to be in a preview release, some of the stuff we've seen. And then we're going to take questions from the audience. So just relax and feel free to ask questions. I guess we'll take all the questions at the end, but please don't be shy with the questions. That's why we're here. And we'll also be around. I know Brett is giving a more advanced talk after this, a much more technical talk. And then after that, we've got a code lab. And so we'll definitely be around all day. Please feel free to approach us and talk to us, ask us questions, tell us how you feel. Anyway, so that's it. So I think you guys just saw this slide. We built Google App Engine because, again, we think that building web applications is just way too hard. We've been building applications now on the web for more than a decade, and it's still a very difficult prospect for a developer to do. We've made a lot of advances, but I think that we have a lot of work left to do. So as a developer, of course, what are some of the things you need to do when you're building a web application? Well, you need to secure hosting, which means either buying or reserving machines. You need to set up your stack, which is in most cases a LAMP stack these days. So you need to set up your Linux environment, your Apache server. You need to do all the configurations there. You need to set up your SQL database. That's a lot of configuration. And then finally, also, you need to write your application. I mean, that one's a given. But once you're done with that, you need to build out other pieces of infrastructure which ensure that your app stays running. So things like logging and monitoring, things that will give you a window into how your app is doing and provide you with ways to debug it and fix it and maintain it while it's up there. So let's say I've gone through all of this, I've spent all of the money that I need to spend, and I've spent all the time building out these things, and I have a running app. And now I start getting some users and run into a whole new set of problems. So my original environment now suddenly can't handle the load. And I have to often very frantically start building out more infrastructure. So I need to get more servers, and I need to buy more machines. I need to split my serving architecture up over several different machines instead of just one. And I need to load balance between all of those things, all those machines. Sometimes I actually need to split apart my database across several different machines as well. And that's a much more difficult task. So these problems are problems that all web application developers run into. Especially recently, with a lot of social networking applications that people have written on OpenSocial and Facebook. The adoption curve is so steep. I mean, you release your application, and a couple of people adopt it, and then all of their friends adopt it, and then all of their friends install it. And it keeps going like that, and you go from one user to millions of users in a few days. And that's just an incredible timeline to deal with for some of these problems. And so we've seen, actually, with a lot of these developers, that these problems end up really, really hampering them and taking a lot of their time. Some major web applications, names that everyone would recognize, you can read papers online that show that some of them have had to re-architect their entire systems. Up to 5 times in a single year. And again, that's a lot of time spent building things that don't really matter to your end users. Building things that aren't cool features, and building things that don't really improve the usefulness of your app. And so these were the problems that we had in mind when we started working on Google App Engine. And what we released was a way for developers to build and host their web applications on Google's infrastructure. So at Google, we build web apps too. All of these problems are our problems. And we've spent the last decade dealing with them. And we've built out a lot of pieces of infrastructure that help our own internal developers do this much more easily. And so Google App Engine actually takes a lot of these pieces of infrastructure and bundles them together and exposes them to the world so that external developers can take advantage of them too. So I think the two goals that really summarize what we had in mind, way back when we started this project, were that we wanted to make it easy to start a web application, and we wanted to make it easy to scale a web application. So that immense startup cost and the workload, we wanted to get rid of that. We wanted to make it both much easier to do and much cheaper, preferably free. And then once you actually started gaining users, we wanted to make it so that web applications would scale easily without the developer having to worry about all of those, splitting the serving architecture and load balancing and things like that. So those are our design goals. And I can talk about both of these points, but I think it's much more convincing to actually see a demo from Brett, who is actually going to build a live application from scratch in a little less than 10 minutes, which should illustrate how easy we think that we've made it to start applications. So, Brett? We're going to swap out.
All right, yes, swap. Sorry. So hey, I'm Brett Slackton. I'm a software engineer on the Google App Engine team. I'm going to give you a demo today of building an application from scratch in just a matter of minutes to kind of just show you how easy it is to go from nothing to an actual application. So okay, so that's working. All right. So what we're going to build is a kind of guestbook application, just a standard kind of people can say, hey, I visited your page and I liked it. That kind of application. Maybe you've seen this on the web already. But we're just going to build it from scratch. So the first thing we got to do is create a new project directory here. I'm going to call my project Shout Out. So I'm going to let people shout out to each other. Friends can shout out to their friends and so on. So to start out, you have to define something called an app.yaml file, so application configuration file. And in this file, you say your application name. Then you say the version of your application that you're going to use, the runtime, which in this case is just Python, which is the first language we support, and then the API version, which at the current time is only one. Then you define the handlers in your application. And this explains how the URLs kind of map to your code. So in this case, it's a regular expression, .star, and I'm going to have all URLs go to a script called main.py. Python file. So then I'll actually create this file and start with some just basic stuff here. So we'll start with hello world. Really simple. Okay. So I can drag this into the SDK and I can run it and then click on browse. So this is running on my local machine. This is just on my machine. It's a local development environment that simulates the same environment that you get on the server. We do our best to, try to perfectly replicate what you see on the actual server side. Okay, so that's hello world. So very simple. Let's do something more complicated. So to get you started, we actually provide a module called Web App, and Web App is it's a module that's kind of a very simple web application framework. It's very, very, very simple, so it gets you started. But it's actually powerful enough to write a pretty decent-sized application. So we're going to use Web App to define an application. Now, in Web App, you define something called a request handler. And the request handler is what handles incoming HTTP requests. So in this case, we have a HTTP GET request. So to handle that, we'll just write to the output. Hello from Web App. And then the rest of this is kind of hook it up to get this working. So we're going to define a main function. We're going to define an application. And WSGI here is a standard Python container. It's a web server gateway interface, common gateway interface. It's a standard kind of Python construct you see people use. And the WSGI application will just define how our URLs map from, so before we had URLs mapping to files, now we have, within the file, URLs mapping to actual code, like directly to code. And so in this case, I'm going to have all of my all of my URLs mapped to my new handler. And then I'll run this application. To do that, I use something called WSGI ref, which is the standard reference implementation of WSGI for Python. Okay, so run my app. And then a little bit of just a standard Python idiom for running main. Okay, so go back to my browser, reload. There you go, reload from web app. Okay, cool. So along with web app, we also provide you a simple templating module, and it's based on Django templates, which Django is a very well-known, common Python web application framework. So we give you that out of the box just to use. It's very useful. So I'm going to use Django to do this. So template module, import it like that, and when you use it, you just render a template. So render, say main.html is my template name. So that would render the template. So let's actually create that template. So main.html. And so to start off, so we'll have we're calling our thing shout out Taiwan. Okay. So there's our template, just HTML. Here we're rendering it to the output. So if we go back here and I reload, there you go, shout out Taiwan. Okay, so you can see it's very quickly, you can iterate, you don't need to compile, you just modify your code and keep moving. You can iteratively add more code. Okay, so let's do something more complicated. Let's actually make this into a real application. So to do this, I'm going to create a new form. I'm going to make the form post. And I'm going to create some input fields. And they're going to be, there's going to be two fields. There's going to be who sent the message, and then there's going to be the actual message itself. So from, and then we're going to have another one, which is the message. And then I'm going to have my button say shout. Okay. So I just modify my template, go back here, reload. All right, there we go. So now, right now, this doesn't actually do anything because I'm just getting the template working. But let's go back to my handler here, and we'll define a post handler. So this takes an HTTP post from the form and then does something in response. So here I'll just say, right here, post received. So I received the post. Okay. So this is just handling the form submission. So we go back here and say post received. So we get that. Okay. Now let's actually do something more interesting. Let's store some data. So to store data, we provide something called a DB module. It lets you define data models and the properties of those data models, and lets you store them in the data store. And so I'll import the DB module, and I'll define a simple model. And so I'm going to call my model shout, and it's going to contain a few properties. First, we'll have who, which is the person who sent the message. Then I'll have the message itself. And then when the message was sent. And then in this case, I'm using something called auto now add, which just means when you insert this into the data store, just write the time, so we know when the shout was made. So then I can modify the post handler to actually insert a shout like this. And I just construct it just like a normal Python object. So I say new shout, who, then I get the parameters from the requests. So I'll say, all right, well that's who, and the message is the message, same thing. Getting the parameter from the request. So this is just from the form that I created. And then I put the new shout into the data store. Done. Now once that's done, kind of a common thing you see, I want to redirect the user back to the main page. Okay. So go here, looks like it didn't do anything. Well, that's because we're not showing the data yet. So we've inserted data in the data store, but we don't have any data coming back out. So we need to do a query. So let's do a query. So in my get handler here, I'm going to use a gql query to retrieve all the shouts from the data store. So I'll say shouts equals gql query, and then just kind of use some familiar syntax here. So select star from shout, then I'll fetch, say, the first 100. Then I'll pass this into my template, so I can use that variable in my templates. Okay, so up here we do the query, and then here we pass the context into our template. And in this case, I'm selecting all shouts. So now if I go into the template, I can actually use that. So here, this is the Django template, standard Django style. And it has a very simple syntax. And so here I can define, so here I'm going to create a new div for each shout. It's going to have the message and who it's from. It's just accessing the properties of a shout object. And the other thing I want to remember to do is to escape this. I don't know if you've ever had your site hacked. I have, so be sure to escape whenever you're doing this, so someone doesn't attack your website. Okay, so I'm doing the query, I've got it in the template, this should start working. So go back here, reload. There it is, so that's when I posted. So I can add a few more. I can, and so on. But I realized I actually want the queries to go the opposite direction. I want the latest query first. So to do that, I'm just going to modify my query real quickly. Go back in here. And so I've selected all from shout. So now I actually want to add a sort order. So I'll say order by the one field in descending order. So show me the newest one first. So I just modify the query. Go back here, reload. They just flipped around. So you can see you can very quickly go from nothing to something. And here's a working application. Now again, this is completely on my own machine. So now, in the SDK, this is the deploy button. I can click deploy, and it'll pop up here with a status message. Now, at this point, it's actually talking to our cluster, talking to our infrastructure, our scalable infrastructure. It's already done. It's uploaded my application to the web. And so now I can go to shoutout@tw.appspot.com. If you have a laptop, I encourage you to go there. This is live on the web for anyone. And here's me posting. So, hi Taiwan. There we go. It's done. Live application. So just a few minutes. We started with nothing, and now we've got a live app on the web. That's that easy.
All right. Sorry about that. Minor technical difficulty there. Okay. So I'm going to turn this down a bit. So next I'm going to talk a bit about the components that make up App Engine. I mentioned before that App Engine is really just a collection of pieces of infrastructure that we use internally at Google to build our own web applications. I'm going to go through what some of those are. So next slide. So the first one is our scalable serving infrastructure. I took this photo at one of our data centers recently. When Brett deployed his application, what actually happened was that the code was submitted to our servers and deployed automatically to a number of different fault-tolerant servers. So it's serving on multiple servers from the start. And so if any machine fails over, we can instantly fall back on any of the other servers. And when your application starts receiving more traffic, we increase the number of servers that are hosting your application. We can spin up a new instance of that application in a matter of seconds. And so it's very easy and it's very smooth to increase traffic and to increase load because we are already serving off multiple machines, and we can increase or decrease that number according to the needs of the application. So the next one is important. And that's our distributed data store. So this is the persistence layer that Brett used to store data on our servers. And This ridiculous graphic is, we actually chose that because this is based on a technology that we've developed at Google called Bigtable. It's a completely distributed, schemaless, object-based data store. And so what does that mean? Well, it's a database, but it's designed to run on, with a single database designed to run on thousands of disks across thousands of machines at the same time, which means that it's very easy to scale horizontally. It's very easy to add, many more rows to this database without actually, falling over. So what else does that mean? Well, because it's built to be distributed like this, it's difficult to support some aspects of SQL that a lot of SQL developers are used to. And so the data store does not support some of these pieces. Joins, for example. You can't do a join using the App Engine data store, and that's because joins are very difficult to implement scalably in this kind of distributed environment. We do, on the other hand, support transactions. We support composite indexes, and we support queries as well, complex queries with sorting and filtering and ordering. So while you will find as a SQL developer some of the pieces of functionality that you're used to, you'll find that you can't use them here. We think that the advantages that Bigtable presents will make it more than enough to get used to. And we think that a lot of developers actually end up really enjoying the model as well. Because it's schemaless, it allows for a very rapid iteration, like you saw with Brett. Next slide. So this should look familiar by now. This is a model class, and this is a definition of a type of entity that you can store in the database. And so this is the same one that Brett used, more or less. This is a message entity, and it has 3 properties. The content property, which stores the content of the message. A when property, which is a timestamp, and that indicates when this message was created. And a who property, which stores the name of the person who posted the message. Now, once I've stored a bunch of these types of entities in the data store, I may want to query for them. And so the next slide is a sample query. And as you saw Brett use, we exposed a query language that's very similar to SQL. Again, it doesn't support joins and some of the other functionality that SQL developers are used to, but the syntax should be relatively familiar. This is an example query. So here I've selected all of the messages where the poster is Brett. I actually have an extra asterisk on the second line, it's a mistake. But where the poster is Brett, and I'm ordering them by the posting time in descending order. So it's a fairly simple query, and it should look fairly familiar. The next component is the Python runtime and libraries. So Python is the first language that App Engine supports, and right now all applications running on App Engine are written in Python on the server side. On the client side, you can run anything you want, so you can serve anything over HTTP that you could with any other serving environment, hosting environment. You can serve JavaScript, or Flash, or HTML, or XML, or JSON. That's all up to you, but on the server side, it's all Python right now. And so what does that mean? Well, App Engine ships with 100% of the Python language, and around 95% of the standard library. Is this too loud? Sure? All right. It feels loud up here. And around 95% of the standard library. So why 95%? Well, for security reasons, we only run interpreted code in App Engine. And so we had to remove some of the Python libraries that depend on native C code. And so for that reason, we included most, but not all, the standard library. I think that most of the components that people normally use running App Engine you'll find there. We support a number of frameworks as well, such as Django. Next slide, please. So the fourth component is our software development kit. You saw Brett use this locally to work on his own machine. We've emulated as closely as possible the environment that you'll find on the server and made it open source so you can develop entirely on your own machine. This allows for much more rapid iteration. I mean, you basically change your code and hit refresh. Once you're done developing, you can deploy, and then you're live on Google servers. And so when you're live on Google servers, at this point, you'll need a window into how you're doing. I mean, if you're working locally,
you can use the the console or the terminal to look at the logs and see stack traces and debug that way. But once you're on our servers, you don't have that window. So we provided another tool that allows you to do these things, and that's our web-based administration console. So I'm going to give a quick demo, actually, of the admin console for you now. Have you open Firefox? Right. So I've written a similar app called mycoolapp.appspot.com. And this is very similar to what you just saw Brett write, and it's basically a web posting. And so I can say, hi, and sign it. So let's say that I've deployed this app, which I have, and I want to know how it's doing. Well, I can use our admin console to look at this developer. And so the first thing that I see is a list of all the applications that I've developed, and right now there's only one. It's my cool app. So I click into it, and make this bigger. So the first thing you'll notice at the top is a graph of the requests per second that my app is receiving. Now, for some reason, my cool app hasn't really caught on yet. Don't have many users at this point, so the request count is pretty low. But you can also see below that a list of the application quotas. We'll talk a bit more about those later. Below that, you can see a list of the popular URLs and the most error-prone URLs. That really helps with debugging. So some of the other capabilities. Request logs. When you're developing locally, you can use the terminal, the console window, to examine the output of your application. You can read through your logs there, and you can look at stack traces, and that really helps with debugging and development. When you're running on the server, you can use our log viewer to do the same thing. And so you can see here a list of all the errors I've received. And you'll actually notice a lot of errors on a URL called broken page. And that's because the version I'm actually running has an error that I built in on purpose. And so if I click on a link to broken page, I'll get a stack trace. Now if I look back at my logs, I can see this same stack trace here. So that's really helpful for debugging. Now, something that I can do once I've noticed this, let's say that I've just deployed this version and I've got this awful error, and I want to go back to the version I was using before that. Well, what can I do? Look at the versions tab here, and I see a list of all of the major versions of my application. I can actually roll back instantly to version 1.1. And you'll see now, if I go back to the main page. All right. Okay. So you'll see now that the link now works. I've actually switched versions while we are running live, and people are obviously using this, and I'm sure none of you saw any hiccups. I couldn't read much of that, so I'm not sure what's that. Anyway, so what else can you do with the admin console? The data viewer. Well, here are all the posts that this application has received. The data viewer actually allows you to go in and look at all the data that has been stored on in your application's data store. And what you can actually do is go in and edit the data. Hi, I'm great. You can edit it also live, so that on a refresh, I am great. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to show you with the admin console is the ability to tie your own domains to your application. You can see that both applications that Brett and I have used have been something.appspot.com. And every application you develop will serve automatically from this domain. But a lot of developers, they want to serve an app from their own domain. And so I've registered a domain. And I'm actually going to serve off of that. And so my domain is domain.iown.com. All right. So now I'm presented with a screen that allows me to select a subdomain of my choice. So I'm going to say www, set the terms of service, and I'll activate it. And now hopefully, www.adomain.iown.com. Ooh. There we go. Not sure they're allowed that. So anyway, back to the slides. All right. So what are some of the other APIs that developers can use with App Engine? Well, there's a couple of them. The first one is Memcache. So this is actually an API that we announced 2 weeks ago at our Google I/O event in San Francisco. Memcache is a coherent caching layer that applications can use to speed up reads for data that they use repeatedly. So it's another way to make rendering even faster for web apps. Applications can also send email. They can make arbitrary HTTP requests to any URL. If you want to provide your users with a personalized experience, you can build your own user management system. But we also provide you with the ability to authenticate your users with Google accounts, so Gmail accounts. And that should make it easier. It's not required to use that, but it's offered. And we find that it saves developers a lot of time. Then finally, the image manipulation API. So developers can use this to perform common image transformations like rotation and scaling and thumbnailing on the server side. Next slide, please. So we released App Engine about 2 months ago, and we called it a preview release. And the reason we did that is because it's not done. We're definitely missing several pieces of functionality that we think are very important. And so we're very open to the fact that we don't think it's ready for prime time yet. And we released it early to try to get developer feedback. And so that's one of the reasons we're here today, is to hear what you really want to see from App Engine and what your experiences are. So more specifically, what does that mean? Well, right now, App Engine is completely free to use. So all apps are restricted to a set of free quotas. And that means an app can store about 500 megabytes of data, and it receives enough CPU and bandwidth to serve around 5 million page views per month, completely for free. In the future, we'd also like to allow developers to purchase more quota as their application needs it, but I want to stress, next slide. Right, so this actually says 2 gigabytes of bandwidth a day. It's actually 11 gigabytes, or is it 12? So it's around 11 gigabytes per day, another mistake in the slide. So I want to stress right now, though, that App Engine will always be free to get started. I said in the beginning that we set out to make building web applications easier to start, and part of that means getting rid of the upfront cost that a developer faces before knowing even if their application is going to become popular or not. And so we're committed to supporting 5 million page views per month for a well-written app for free in the future as well. Now, I said again, though, that sometime later this year, we'd also like to start allowing developers to purchase more computing resources as their app needs it. So what else is next? I went over some of this during the keynote this morning. What else is next? More languages. Again, Python is the first language we support. We definitely know that a lot of web developers like using other languages too. And so we haven't really made any announcements yet about what those languages will be. But I'd also like to get your feedback today on what languages you'd like to see. So if you've got a language that you'd really like to use with App Engine, let us know. We want to allow developers to purchase additional capacity and additional computing resources as their applications need it. Finally, large upload and downloads. Right now, all requests incoming and outgoing to App Engine applications are limited to 1 megabyte in size. And that's very good for a lot of applications. I mean, 1 megabyte is actually pretty decent for a request size. But we recognize that in order to serve large files like high-resolution images, music, or movies, you need a lot more than that. And so we're working on building that out. And finally, offline processing. I mentioned before that all App Engine apps are request-based. So I send a request as a user, I type in a post or something like that. The app receives the request, does some work, and sends a response. We'd also like to support much more large-scale offline type computing processes as well. So we're working on that. And we haven't given any dates for a lot of these things yet. It's very hard to predict, but we're working pretty hard. And that's it. So that's basically an overview of Google App Engine. We think that what we've come out with is a preview release. It's definitely not finished, but we're very happy with the product, and we've done some fantastic response from the developer community. And so we're really excited about that. And we want to see, what you guys think about it, where you want to see it go, what you built on it, things like that. So we're going to take some questions now. Definitely encourage anyone to ask a question if you're curious about anything. And also, please feel free to, stop by at any point today and talk to us.
We have a code lab also happening in I think room 103 this afternoon. So we'll be there from 1 p.m. On, maybe 1:15. So feel free to stop by if you have any questions, specific questions. If you want to tell us about how you or your business are using App Engine, we'll be there. We'd like to talk to you. But yeah, we're going to take questions right now. I don't know if we have I can have a runner. I'll run around. Okay.
Just raise your hand.
Okay. Yeah. Do you provide any debugger for the App Engine?
Yeah, I can take this one. Running back and forth. So the question is, do we provide a debugger for App Engine? So you can use Python's built-in Python debugger. So all the same tools you use for debugging, kind of stepping through code in normal Python code, you can use with App Engine on the client side. So when you're using the SDK, the local environment, you can use Python debugger just like that. And you can also use it with, we've seen people use it with Eclipse, with PyDev, which is an Eclipse tool. So there's instructions online for getting Eclipse working with the Python debugger and the SDK so that when a request comes in, goes into your Python code, and it'll actually stop at a breakpoint that you've set in the code so you can figure out what's going wrong. In production, once you've deployed your application, the logging system that Pete showed you is the best way to kind of debug a live problem. You can do logging at many different levels, debug, warning, error, info, all these different levels of severity. And so you can kind of selectively report problems as they happen and then debug your live running application that way. So that's kind of the balance we've struck with debugging. So, hands?
What's the plan for supporting Java?
So as I said before, we're definitely really excited to support more than just Python. We haven't made any announcements yet at this point, and unfortunately, I'm not going to make an announcement now, so I'm just going to have to wait.
How about SSL support?
Sure. Actually, Brent, do you want to handle this?
XSL, like style transformation?
SSL.
Oh, SSL. Yeah, so this was one we get a lot also. People say, if I want to run a real business application, I need encryption. I need full SSL support for serving. So we don't have that right now. We understand that there's a huge class of applications that need SSL support. So we're working on it. One of the things I will say though is our URL fetch service, which lets you communicate with other web services, does support SSL. So you can connect to SSL within your application to do authentication. So you can use SSL web services, but you can't serve SSL requests right now. So we're very aware of that limitation, and yeah, we're trying our best to address it.
What's your plan through Python 3000?
Okay, I'm going to keep running back and forth. So Guido Van Rossum is on our team. He's the creator and primary developer of Python. So to quote what Guido said, that exact same question was asked at Google I/O. And he said, if I remember correctly, Guido said, we don't have any plans yet, we don't know what we're going to do, and if anything, we're going to consider Python a wholly separate language, Python 3000, will be considered a wholly separate language from Python 2.5, which is the current version that we support. And I think that that's because Python 3000 definitely changes a lot in Python. It's not backwards compatible, but I know that Guido's keen on the idea of supporting Python 3000, obviously, because he's been spending, I guess 17 years working on Python. So, yeah.
Will Google provide map-reduced architecture in Google App Engine in the future?
Sure. So the question was, will Google provide MapReduce support? MapReduce is a technology that Google has developed that's useful for performing large-scale processing over data that's spread out in a distributed environment. And so to answer your question, I think that's something we're very interested in looking at. We haven't yet made a lot of the decisions about what form our offline processing is going to take, and we're looking at that. But I don't have a definite answer for you now. I think that'd be very interesting to do, though.
I have two questions. The first question is, can we download the slide you shared today? Some questions. Slide.
Okay. Actually, I think that these will be posted.
Okay.
If you want, oh, you have the slides as well. Right. So the I/O slides. So if you want right now, you can look at code.google.com, and there's a link to around 70 talks that occurred about 2 weeks ago at Google I/O in San Francisco, and a lot of the material, and also a lot more about App Engine and other Google developer products are covered there with the slides as well. So.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
The second question is about Google Engine, the relationship between Google Engine and Android. What the relationship between both?
Sure. So Google App Engine is a way to host applications, and it's a very general tool. So you can build a web application on Google App Engine that uses Google Android as a client, or the iPhone as a client, or Facebook as a client, or OpenSocial, or a normal web browser in any other capacity. So you can definitely use the two together. So using App Engine on the back end to store your data and do your processing, and the Android handset on the front end to actually display that information to users and provide the user interface. So the answer is yes, you can definitely use those two together.
Hi. I feel difficult to select my sessions. Can you briefly describe in the next session over the time?
Okay, yeah, so what's the next session on? So the next, I think it's in half an hour, or 10 minutes, 15 minutes, something like that. The next session is, I'm going to be presenting, it's called Building Scalable Web Applications with Google App Engine. So we're going to go kind of much deeper into how to write a scalable application in App Engine, why it scales, some of the pitfalls, the issues you'll run into, why it's difficult, how it's different than what you're used to. So that's kind of what we're doing next. And it's a very technical talk.
Okay, you mentioned that a big table is schema-based, but actually maybe programmers want to build complicated model. Is there any helper function or just support in the DB data store? Helper function.
Helper function, right?
Yeah, so when you say helper function, to support a very complicated model, so it's schemaless, but as Pete showed and I showed in the application, you can define a model with properties, and so you can give it a schema if you want to give it a schema with saying, okay, it has these fields, and these ones are required, these ones are not. We have a lot of ways to indicate what the data must look like. So you can enforce a schema. The choice is up to you. We also have something called Expando, and Expando lets you add properties dynamically. And that really takes advantage of the schemaless design. So if you want to add a property, you can. You don't have to do an update or an alter on your table. You just add the entity. Like you just add the property to your entities, and it works. Yeah, so is that an answer your question?
Maybe like Ruby on Rails model that there's some function like has many, has one-to-one, and some function like that.
Right, yeah, okay, so, okay, now I understand. So there's a great talk by Rafe Kaplan, who's a fellow team member, software engineer on the App Engine team. It's on the website, code.google.com. It's linked from the I/O slides.
It's called Working with App Engine Models.
And it goes into one-to-many, many-to-many, many-to-one relationships, and how to define those complicated data models in App Engine. So I definitely suggest you check that out.
So far. What kind of risk do we have if we try to post our telecom service on your application engine?
So that's a very good question. That's a question we've gotten a lot. People ask about privacy and security. If you store your application data and your users' data on Google servers, what kind of reassurance do you have that that data will be kept secure and kept private? The answer to that, I think, is that Google is a web service company, a web application company, and we depend for our business, almost more than anything else, on the security and the privacy of our own users' data. So we spend an awful lot of time thinking about security and thinking about privacy and building out that security to make sure that your data is secure as possible. So I actually can't go into really any of the specifics about how the security works, but rest assured that we spent a lot of time thinking about this, and we have a lot of people that are monitoring this and working on this around the clock to make sure that your data is secure.
Sorry, all right. Everything's breaking today, so... test. Oh, it's working. Okay. So the other thing is that we do partition the data, though. So each application that's on App Engine is partitioned securely away from every other application. So there's no risk of having applications, somehow, share data or accidentally run into each other, or risking getting your private information, given to another application or anything like that. We very strictly partition and secure each application individually. The other thing is, we take, like Pete said, we take privacy very seriously. The other thing to keep in mind is that when you give us data to store in App Engine, it's your data. You still maintain all of the rights to that data. We're not searching through that data. We're not doing anything with that data. We're storing the data for you. And so you retain the copyrights, the IP, it's yours. And so we take privacy very seriously, and security of your data very seriously. So we're as Pete said, we're doing the best we can to ensure privacy and security. Yeah.
You just mentioned you're considering to add some more languages. I'm not sure if Vietnamese is included. If not, I suggest you can add Vietnamese, because there are thousands of Taiwanese companies in Vietnam. They need all kinds of software. In my experience, it costs a lot to develop Vietnamese version, to add the Vietnamese version in the software package. So if it is built in your solution, I think that will cost down our development cost for those Vietnamese companies. So,
yeah, I can address this one. So, to clear this up, right now, if you're, I think if you're in Vietnam and you want to sign up for App Engine, you can. You can use it today. You can serve the Vietnamese language from App Engine. You can serve Chinese from App Engine, Japanese, whatever you want, any language, spoken language can be served from App Engine. So there's no restriction on that. And we have people in 100 countries worldwide developing App Engine applications and serving them in a whole bunch of languages. So you're good to go. You can do this now. The languages that we're looking to support are like programming languages. So like people talked about PHP and Ruby. Someone asked about job support. So that's what we're working on, figuring out what's next. But in terms of language, it's HTTP, it's HTML. You set your character encodings, you get to serve whatever you want. So there's no restriction on that whatsoever. So I think we have time for one more question, and then we're out of time. Yeah.
I saw that you typed a special domain name there during the demo. So what about the domain name issue? We can use any domain name we want on the App Engine?
Yes. So you can use any domain name that you want. You can use any domain name that you want as long as you own that domain.
Yeah, we just give you AppSpot for free to get you started if you don't own one. But yeah, if you own it, you can use it. There's no restriction on that. So. I think that's all the time we have. So thanks again for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.